Monthly endometrial cycle and menstruation. The monthly cyclical production of estrogen and progesterone by the ovaries is also known as the endometrial cycle. This occurs inside the lining of the uterus, and there are three falling stages that it occurs in: the proliferation of the uterine endometrium, the development of the secretory changes in the endometrium, and the desquamation of the endometrium, which is also known as menstruation. 11 days in, there's the proliferative phase. 12 days after, we have the secretory phase, and the final 5 days is going to be the menstrual phase. The proliferative phase. This is the estrogen phase that happens right before the ovulation. At the beginning of each monthly cycle, most of the endometrium has been desquamated by menstruation. After menstruation, there's only going to be like a thin layer of stroma remain in the deeper portions of the glands and hidden inside the deeper parts of the endometrium. As the estrogen levels kick in, it's increased in amount by the ovaries during the first part of the monthly cycle. The stroma cells and the epithelial cells begin to rapidly proliferate and grow. The surface of the cell slowly gets re-epithelialized within 4 to 7 days after the beginning of the menstruation. Then, the next week and a half before ovulation actually occurs, the endometrium increases greatly in thickness. This is owing to the number of stromal cells in the progressive layer of the endometrial glands, as well as new blood vessels that grow into the endometrium. It's like a sponge. It gets to about 3 to 5 millimeters thick. There are also going to be endometrial glands, especially those of the cervical regions. They secrete this stringy mucus, helps align themselves with the cervical canal that helps them guide the channel for the sperm to properly swim. The secretory phase, which is also known as the progestational phase of the endometrium, occurs after the ovulation. This happens during the later half of the monthly cycle. The progesterone and estrogen get secreted in large amounts by the corpus luteum. Estrogen is going to cause a slight additional cellular proliferation in this phase, whereas progesterone makes an incredible amount of swelling and secretory development of the endometrium. The glands increase in its thickness, and excess of secretory substances accumulate inside the epithelial cell. And the blood supply to the endometrium also increases as well. At the peak of the secretory phase, about 1 week after ovulation, the endometrium is about 5 to 6 millimeters, which is basically double the size during the proliferative phase. Relaxin is a hormone polypeptide that plays a role in the relaxation of the pubic symphysis and helps dilate the cervix. There's some role for this as it encourages fertilization to occur and the implantation into the uterus. Menstruation, if the egg cell is not fertilized, about 2 days before the end of the monthly cycle, the corpus luteum in the ovary involutes. This means that the ovarian hormones estrogen and progesterone decrease to a low amount, and it ceases for the egg to survive. Menstruation is directly linked to the reduction in the drop of estrogen and progesterone, predominantly progesterone, at the end of the month. The first effect is to decrease the stimulation of the endometrial cells by these two hormones. Then, 24 hours preceding the onset of menstruation, the blood vessel layer inside the endometrium becomes vasospastic, which basically makes it release these vasoconstricting material, such as prostaglandins, during this time. This vasospasm will decrease the number of nutrients to the endometrium, and the loss of that hormonal stimulation leads to necrosis and the breakdown of the endometrial lining. As a result, it first seeps into this vascular layer and it leads to this hemorrhagic growth over the next 24 to 36 hours, and that necrotic outer layer of the endometrium separates from the uterus and then is shed off. The mass of this desquamated tissue and blood in the uterine cavity, plus the contractile effects of the vasospastic prostaglandins and other substances, act together to encourage contractions and expel that uterine content. Menses are considered non-clotting because of a chemical known as fibrinolysin. It reduces the clots, and therefore, if there are clots during menstruation, this could be indicative of some sort of uterine disease. Another clinical application is leukorrhea. This is when there are large amounts of leukocytes that are released along with the necrotic blood material. This could be indicative of infection